Australia just had, in my opinion, probably one of the largest software failures that at least I've ever seen. So let's talk about it. But before we talk about Australia, we have to talk about the current state of AI and software because it's all related. Where are we today? Well, we're currently in a situation where Anthropic and OpenAI have made many promises. Sometimes, or to some extent, maybe we can claim OpenAI has backtracked a little bit. But the key thing that they've said is that AI will write all software and coding is solved. And that software engineering will be fully automated by 2027. We have heard many variations of these stories. They have sold everything up and down, and this has, in my opinion, caused large scale layoffs because organizations start panicking and saying, oh well, if this is going to be solved, well, we should start cutting people now, so that we can get this kind of competitive edge, and leads to this, in my opinion, a weird game theory situation. Maybe that's a topic for another day. But the key high level idea that has been parroted in Silicon Valley is that we don't need to worry about software engineering anymore. We don't need to worry about coding. Just buy our product, buy OpenAI, buy Claude, and off you go. It's done. But what has actually happened? And rather than look at other organizations, perhaps we should really just look at these organizations themselves. What is their flagship software product that they're selling? How are they doing? Have they solved software? And no, I don't think so. There's numerous examples. We have Claude Code. We'll start from the middle. They had their flickering bug for months and months and months. And even in their own PR description and whatnot, it acknowledged that this was a problem. And who knows whether it's going to come up again and what they're doing about it. But the truth is that their own AI has clearly failed to solve it, burning who knows how many tokens. They're also clearly just vibe coding in production. There's many examples of memory leaks and performance issues that Claude Code has, with varying level of fixes that are available. And of course, there's a situation where they just released all their source code to the world. So let's face it, if you have a company with this kind of track record trying to tell the world that software engineering is solved, we should really think about that a little bit more critically. But of course, these kinds of things don't make headlines. It's always the CEOs. Yeah, and we also have a scenario similar to what I talked about in the previous video, where we are beholden to whatever they tell us. You might be in a situation where you go from like Opus 4.6 to 4.7, and all of a sudden you see that it's regressing in quality, and you're like, okay, why is that? And in some instances, you don't really have a choice to upgrade or not. You just have to use whatever model they tell you, because perhaps there's a sunset date and so on. Some of these problems have been widely talked about and widely discussed. And that's one of the problems with relying on these people, OpenAI and Anthropic, who are trying to drive the world to a particular direction when they hold all the cards. That's the issue. They are setting the precedent and they hold their cards. It's in their best interest of what they're trying to sell you. And increasingly, they're just trying to tell us that we should just blindly trust them. They know how to solve it. They are going to they're going to solve all the issues for you. But let's think about like what happens in this case. I think that it increases the blast damage for what goes wrong, and there's been numerous cases of that. Some of it is, I guess, is collateral damage of the consequences of AI. A lot of things to do with vulnerabilities or issues that go into things like NPM and the packaging ecosystem, which didn't occur before. And that's just the reality of the world we live in, unfortunately. And we need to think about that. We need to assess that and try to look at that objectively. What happened after all this AI nonsense, and what was the world like before? Of course, AI does have benefits, but we also have to be honest about the critical functions that have now fallen apart. Well, of course, that's the purpose of what I'm talking about today. Now, the thing is, there are other FANG related companies that have thrown their gauntlet in here as well. And of course, big one is Mark Zuckerberg with his recent backtracking about the agentic development not working in the way that he wanted to. I mean, Meta has had numerous headlines about them setting up a completely separate team to try to train their own agents or try to handcraft a way to improve their coding capability, as well as setting up entire divisions to monitor developers, what they click on, what they type, in order to use that to feed into their AI. And it hasn't worked, and he's come out and said that. But this doesn't mean that other companies haven't tried to pivot and spend money on AI. There's been tens of thousands of jobs that have been lost. And it's probably just a sign that this isn't working. We had Cloudflare also cutting a lot of people. And we've also had many companies just admit that the whole token maxing or trying to leverage AI hasn't worked to the way that they want it to. I have other thoughts on the whole token maxing thing. I think some of it was perhaps overly blown up in media, or people only look at the surface level and not like the deeper meaning or the thing behind token maxing and like doing PR reviews. But that's a discussion for another day. But regardless, there has definitely been a gap between what we have been promised and what has eventuated, and it's led to numerous things that have been reported. So if we think about where these three large companies stand now, it looks something like this. You know, Meta has acknowledged they're not ready. OpenAI is scaling back a little bit. And Anthropic, well, they're still just going ham and trying to sell the world, to tell everyone that you need to trust them because they are the ones that are going to bring AI safety. Like that's whole Dario's mandate, that they need to hold the keys because AI is dangerous. If ever AI is dangerous, blah blah blah, and everyone should use regulated AI that Dario owns. So from my perspective, that's why they still keep banging on the drum, whereas other people have started to hold back a bit. Now, I would also say that Anthropic have not been particularly kind in terms of how they react to other people trying to own a little bit of their pie, like open code with their access to the plans has been one example. I understand that it is part of their terms of service that you should use their harness, and there's a multitude of reasons why they want to do that. But regardless, it has always been this like point of contention about Anthropic wanting to own their moat and build this moat, which I think is not necessarily in the best interest of the general person who wants to own the systems that they build. And yeah, this is exactly what has been seen through like open code, trying to work with Anthropic. Anthropic has also had other situations where they have hijacked sessions. If they detect that you're not using a harness, maybe they dumb down your model or dumb down your responses. Like items like that are incredibly dangerous. It just causes a scenario where they are the gatekeepers, which is what Anthropic wants, by the way. This is not an element of them being silly about it. It's just this is how they want to drive the story. They want to be the gatekeepers of this in the name of AI safety and control these things. And this kind of closed ecosystems, well, it lets them do many things that they can start controlling. They can control the narrative, and they can do things that are, to be honest, is not friendly to the user. That's something that we should always keep an eye on and think about what is the perspective for the user, what is the perspective of the company, and what has the company got to gain? Because in a capitalist society, that's unfortunately what generally matters. With all that in mind, what has that got to do with the news of this week? Because all of that I've said is probably old news to many people. And we have Telstra. So Telstra is Australia's largest telecommunications company. At one point, it was a government driven company, and now it's been privatized. And it owned it essentially owned all of the telecommunications, or the majority of it, and it would sell off some of the services to other ISPs and so on, or their infrastructure, so that ISPs could create products on top of it. Now that was once upon a time. Nowadays, I think it's just I think of it as just like another telco, but it is a very, very large one. And what happened this week is that because of a software defect, apparently it affected synchronization with GPS or times or something like that. It caused a large scale shutdown of many critical systems in multiple states and cities across Australia. Regional trains stopped working, traffic lights stopped working. We had EV stations, we had businesses that could no longer pay, including, for example, if you were relying on Apple Pay, you can no longer use Apple Pay as well. So it's not just businesses not being able to receive payment, it was people unable to pay. It literally had instances where people were trying to or were unable to pay for services that they had booked. So I saw on the news, for example, there was someone who booked a ride with a taxi driver but was unable to pay the taxi driver. They didn't have any cash with them. The taxi driver, perhaps maybe the credit card systems didn't work either, who knows. But the fundamental thing that happened was they were unable to perform business. Now, this might not be a big deal if this outage was just 1 or 2 hours. I think it started around 5 a.m. in Australian Eastern Standard Time, or at least I think that was roughly when it was detected. But it didn't just go for 1 or 2 hours. It went on for a good portion of the day. It must have been around probably around 11 or 12 o'clock when 90%, so they say, was resolved. But even over 24 hours, I think they still had issues with say the regional trains in 24 hours, and there was still issues apparently with calling 000, which is the emergency number, equivalent of 911. So all of these issues are extremely dangerous. They are not just they are not the equivalent of, oh, my Claude Code screen is flickering. This is in many instances people's livelihoods, people's lives. There could have been people, and that's part of the inquest, is to see what actually happened, and did this cause a loss of lives? Because something similar happened in Australia. Maybe it was a year or two ago with Optus, where they found out that people were unable to make emergency calls were just unable to make emergency calls if they were with Optus for whatever reason it was, and that caused that they found in their investigation a loss of 2 lives. This kind of stuff is extremely dangerous if we just rely on vibe coding, if we rely on these people, we rely on people like Dario and OpenAI to make claims about software, where we then trust them, or we have organizations that trust them. But guess what? They're not on the hook for software. They're not, it's not like if the software fails, we can then go and complain to Claude or complain to OpenAI to say, hey, you caused something really bad to happen. It could be businesses to lose money. It could be a loss of life. There's no recourse for OpenAI or Anthropic to make those claims. But we are unfortunately the recipients of these issues, especially as companies go and institute these kinds of changes to push through AI. I would entirely blame Telstra, because they have gone through this path, in my opinion, as they've gone and privatized themselves. It is not. It's the same as many like utilities that have gone and privatized. They're all seeking profit. They're not about trying to address efficiencies, and they are for sure using AI to write the software. For whatever reason, why this incident happened and it wasn't resolved in a timely manner, we'll probably have to wait a week or more to find out what is the root cause and what kind of remediations there are. But these kinds of things will only happen more and more. This is just a topic for this week, but there have been multiple instances of things like this happening because of companies perhaps shedding workers and not having the correct staffing or the correct knowledge that to be retained in the organization, or through things like vibe coding. Like there's numerous instances. I remember there were instances related to AWS as well, with like whole regions going down and not having sufficient staff to cover it. So for me, I look at this particular instance with Telstra in Australia. Of course, it affects me as an Australian, but this is no different to anything else in the US and no different to any other thing. It's just another story that will probably be forgotten in a week's time, and there'll be another large organization that have another catastrophic failure that affects millions and millions of people. And in my opinion, there's no real solution to this unless the big names come out and say, hey, software is not going to be replaced. We need to still do our due diligence, and there's still work to do. But they're of course not going to do that because it affects their story. It affects their bottom line and their profits. And that's something we need to remember. And that's the thing that I really want people to remember. Software in these instances aren't just about, oh, did I make an extra click? Did I make some extra money? But in this particular instance, it affects many other people. It affects emergency services in this case. It would affect people's liveliness. And it is absolutely horrendous that these kinds of things can happen, and just because someone says something along those lines in OpenAI or Claude, Anthropic. And I think like that's the other thing, when we have these big names that just hold all the power, because Australia is probably all in on AI, but none of it is like themselves. It's all Anthropic and OpenAI. It's all held in these like closed source infrastructures that's governed by a few labs and governed by a few people that they want to hold all the power. And this is like something that we need to think about. This is only going to be more fragile without the correct thing or the correct setup to guard against it. Whether it's like, it could be testing, human oversight, redundancy, whatever we want to call it. But we can't keep relying on OpenAI, Anthropic, to make these calls because they have their own vested interests to maintain their own moats. We need to think about what it means for your own sovereignty and for your own ownership. And that's like the constant topic that's on my mind. The ownership is gone. It's just, we've just handed over the keys to these big names that have become so large that they are honestly more powerful than countries. And it's very unfortunate. That's what I just want to end on. That's the bottom line. Critical infrastructure requires rigor. The cost of failure is not wasted tokens. It's literally lives on the line. And I don't think people take it seriously enough. I think people, at the end of the day, humans being humans, living in a capitalist society, people only look at their pockets and only look at where the dollar signs are. And that's really unfortunate and really sad. So I'll just end there, and that's something to think about.